Hi, I'm Jerry Wise, and I'm a therapist at Family Tree Counseling Associates in Carmel, Indiana. And I'd like to present this video to you, which is entitled, Growing Up with Superman. You can take a look at the video I presented on Counterdependency and how in that video I talk about counterdependency as being the Superman syndrome. Well, I wanted to talk about what it was like growing up as a parent who's counterdependent and what it's like growing up in a household with a parent who is counterdependent. In other words, growing up in Superman's house. Counterdependency is a problem that costs everyone. It costs the counterdependent. It has heavy costs for the family. It levies heavy costs in parenting and for the children who grow up in a home with a parent who's very counterdependent. And in this video, I want to talk to you about what it's like to be a counterdependent parent and the effects on your kids. Counterdependent parents tend to focus on rules versus the relationship. While it may be helpful when a child is young, 3 years old, 4 years old, rules are very important for the household, and children do need to learn what is right, what is wrong, what they should do, what they should not do, how to stay safe. And so rules are very important. As children get older, the relationship becomes the way of parenting, and the relationship becomes more important than rules. Well, if you're a parent who focuses more on rules than relationships because you feel more comfortable with rules than relationship, then your parenting is going to be stunted, and you're going to be able to only relate to your children at all phases of their development through rules versus relationship. And I think particularly the counterdependent parent tends to use the rule-based means of parenting. This has some unfortunate consequences. For the counterdependent, rules make a lot more sense than relationships because often the counterdependent parent doesn't feel very comfortable with feelings or doesn't feel very comfortable in relationships. The counterdependent parent never wants to express to their children that they have needs or feel weakness or struggle with emotions. Counterdependents don't like to feel vulnerable. And so they withhold feelings. They might have frozen feelings, or they're not aware of their feelings at all. And so this presents a picture to the kids that they are Superman and have no feelings, have no weaknesses, have no struggles. And while there may be times that might be a helpful state to project, I'm not sure that's the best overall parenting mode to use throughout a child's growing up. The counterdependent parent has learned to trust no one but himself, and this leaves little room for shared parenting with his spouse or power sharing with the kids. In other words, I'm in control, it's my family, do it my way, I know the best way to do it. And there's not very much room for other people's opinions, beliefs, values, needs. It's my way or the highway. Everyone must do what Superman thinks is right. The counterdependent parent does not feel comfortable feeling close to anyone, and that would be children or their spouse. And so that lack of closeness, unfortunately, gets transmitted intergenerationally. In other words, it gets passed on to our children. They learn about intimacy from us. Counterdependent parents feel more comfortable parenting children who don't demand a lot of closeness or who don't have a lot of emotional messiness. Well, of course, that can be difficult if you have children that have problems. Now, it's just fine if your children are perfect and never have any difficulties and don't have needs and never get in trouble and or have any emotional struggles. But for most of us, children have all of those issues. And for the counterdependent parent, they have more of a problem with empathizing with children who are not supermen themselves. So if you have children who have ADHD or learning disabilities or emotional struggles or just don't measure up to Superman's expectations, then Superman, the counterdependent parent, has a real struggle with that child. And their bonding may be interrupted as a result of that intolerance or criticism, because Superman doesn't feel comfortable dealing with feelings or dealing with messiness or emotional struggles. And so there may be some neglect, or there may be some distance between that parent and the child who has difficulties. And in fact, the Superman parent, the counterdependent parent, may feel, if they have a child who's ADHD, for example, that everybody just babies this child. This child doesn't have any problems, they just need to behave. Because they don't want to deal with the struggles or weaknesses or idiosyncrasies or problems that this child has. They don't feel comfortable with those within themselves. So how would they feel comfortable with those in their own children? And in fact, they believe that their role is to just make that child grow up and just behave right. Well, there are times when that approach might work. There's a lot of times when that approach may not work. Counterdependent parents don't see why or how their choices cause problems for kids. We're the adults, think the counterdependent. They are the kids. They may even hold the old view, the kids should be seen and not heard. In other words, kids should have no voice in this. I'm the Superman, I'm the parent, and that's the way it should be in this household. And really, there's not much room for anyone else's self in our family, just Superman's self and view of the world. Counterdependents resist asking for help, or they do not show that they need help. If the counterdependent parent cannot make things work with the kids, then nobody can. Or at least that's the view of Superman, and that's the view of a counterdependent parent. If I can't fix it, nobody can. And many times they will avoid getting help for their kids or help for the family because they feel if they can't deal with it, really nobody else can either. They also feel comfortable power sharing in a sense of, well, if we go and ask for help, somebody else will have input into my family. Somebody else may even have input into my life. That's awfully scary. It feels very vulnerable, and I don't think I can do that. I can't handle that as a Superman. Feelings are avoided by the counterdependent parent. Kids will say, you know, I never saw my father cry. I never saw my dad acknowledge one feeling, and I never saw him acknowledge my feelings or my mother's feelings, let's say. Oftentimes, Superman avoids feelings. Well, feelings are a very, very important part of life. Does that mean feelings should run all of our lives? Well, of course not. But they are a part of our lives, and how we manage feelings can have a lot to do with how we are successful or unsuccessful. Counterdependent parents confuse their children by acting one way and feeling another. In fact, a parent may yell at a child saying, "But I'm your father." And it kind of comes out sounding angry and kind of aggressive. Actually, the parent was trying to say, "You really matter to me." But since the counterdependent parent